Hello and welcome to the Pin Man. All right, those amazing feeds. What has led me to this video? Well, I did a video recently on the TWSBI fountain pen. All right, and that brought up some questions, something that was mentioned in there, and in particular, regarding how the cap, when the piston is extended all the way, this pin won't post, okay, because it's too far away from this rubber O-ring there. And so one person posted this comment: maybe I'm missing something, but why would you write with the piston extended? In other words, all the way down this way, because I said, can't cap. Why would you write with the piston extended? It seems like it only needs to be extended and retracted when filling the pin, then left retracted all the way back here until the next filling. That's the way I treat my piston fillers, including the TWSBI Eco. Is there an advantage to doing it otherwise? All right, my response was, yes, there is an advantage. Sometimes when you are writing and the ink doesn't seem as saturated, and you want more of a saturation. Generally, what that means is the availability of the ink, or the pressure, I don't know what to call it, but isn't as strong. Somehow, for some reason, that ink isn't wanting to get to the feed and the nib as much. And so usually your feed is not running dry, but just a little bit weaker. And so one of the methods to get that more saturated look that you get when you first fill your pen, because when you first fill your pen, your feed is going to be more saturated with ink. There'll be more in your fins of your feed and so forth. We'll talk about that in a minute. And as it gets weaker, you'll push that piston up. I do, and I've heard of others doing the same thing, to where, and you just slowly, incrementally close the chamber up a little bit more, and you will resaturate those fins. The fins mainly work as an overflow, but they can also hold ink. And so as they hold that ink, and when you're start to write with it, you have more ink available, and thus you get a saturated experience. When you do that though, you can't post. Now, that said, you can bring this back a little bit and it will post. It'll start posting with the piston retracted just a little bit. So you really don't have to go too far back. You don't have to go all the way back there. But you are going to have to come back a little bit for that to hold on. So yeah, you don't have to retract it all the way, and you don't have to extend it all the way. Just, you can still get some posting power there. Under my comment, another gentleman opined, with piston fillers, you need to let in air to the ink chamber to allow the ink to flow, especially if you're writing a few pages. Usually, if you don't, the pen runs dry. Turn the pen upside down, and I'm thinking, he's talking about like this. Undo the blind cap, and maybe that means to retract it a few times until you can pull down the piston rod a slight amount. In other words, you pull it down to be able to, you're not pushing ink in, you're kind of sucking air in. So in other words, I think what he is saying is you don't want an absolutely full chamber. And so when I was talking about saturating and pushing out air, I think he was saying that no, you don't want to do that, because then as you use ink, it's going to cause a vacuum in there because you're sucking out ink and no air is in there to be used to allow flow. Much like a like if you have a can of something, you just open it up on one end and you try to pour it out, it doesn't pour very good because you don't have air in there. What does go out is causing a vacuum inside, and the stronger that vacuum, the less that you're going to get flow. But that's not what happens with fountain pen feeds, because I like to fill the whole chamber up as much as I can, you know, so it lasts. And then as I use more ink, I extend the piston, whether it's a piston filler or converter. I will extend it, continue to extend it as far as I go to keep that saturated sensation. All right, so let's take a look at a feed, what they are. So sometimes you get in your feeds, here's the setup. Sometimes you have the feed and the feed housing, and then you see some, I'll use my pointer here, you'll see some threads here. So you put the feed into the feed housing, then you thread the feed housing into your pen grip. Other pens, like this Metro, is the grip doubles as a feed housing. So you're just taking the nib and feed and putting it straight into the grip at your feed housing as well. Here you have just a picture of the nibs, how they sit on the feed. All right, so let's take a look at, talk about how the ink flows. And this is the amazing part of the nib feed. Over here at this end, see if that's in there, not real good. Okay, you have these channels in this nub. The ink chamber stops right here at the end of this big round part there. It stops there. So the only thing that goes into the ink chamber is this nub right here. And that has channels in it. And then right here you have this blank space. And so the ink is, when you're filling the pen, the ink comes up. This is your typical cheap plastic fountain pen nib or feed. So the ink is going to flow up through these voids through the bottom, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's going to come through this entrance here, and then it's going to go down and into your channel through those, into your chamber, through those channels. All right, now this portion here can either be like a straight up and down, which in the case of these types of feeds, it's usually straight up and down. And I think the when I looked at the Twisby one real close, this actually angles up, and then it flows down. You see here's a little bigger picture, straight up at the top. So you have your channels that come to the end of your ink chamber, and then comes through this little hole up through this straight up and down access port. And then the ink flows down these channels here. There will be anywhere from 1 to probably 3 channels, depending on how the engineers did their work. And then you have these fins on the side. The fins are used to hold excess ink. Sometimes it's overflow. If you're writing real fast, then instead of pouring out your nib, the end of your feed and nib, and blotting on your paper, it will fill these fins first. Now, if you get all those saturated somehow, like you're doing this with your pen, then yeah, you can choke out some ink that way. Typically, that's the way these work. And then underneath, you have this larger channel, and that channel goes all the way back. Here's those voids that we saw on the top earlier, and the ink, as you're filling it with ink, it'll go through there and up through these channels. Okay, but this channel doubles as an air access point as well. So as you come back here, as ink flows through this portion here, it is also sucking up air, You don't notice it because it's just real minute air bubbles. And that's going to come back through this channel. Well, how does that happen? Well, number one, these channels don't necessarily fill completely. There is a mixture of air and ink right here. In fact, these channels will start out deeper. These channels will start out deeper on this end. There's a slow incline at the base of the channel, the bottom of the channel. Slow incline until it gets all the way up. It just helps the flow. And through there, you get capillary action and surface tension that's also engineered into how many channels they make, and how thick those channels are going to be, and so forth. And so air is going to come up through there. In fact, if you notice, if you look at this feed sideways, you will notice that this piece of plastic in between those channels sets just below the surface of the two sides of the feed. And so there's room for the ink to flow, but also for air to flow. I was going to get back to these. If you look at, see if we can see them here. You look at the Metro, it's kind of interesting. It only has one channel here, and it looks like it's used primarily for the ink, but then it has this indentation here, and that's part of that. If you flip one of those over, look at the bottom, you have that same real wide channel. That's going to connect to this little wide channel. And it's like there's your air exchange right there. Your ink comes down through this channel, but your air through there. You can see better. So you have this two channels. So that's how the Metro, MR, Cocoon, whichever, does their feed. And other places will do their feed a little bit differently. Okay, a website that I did want to, if you want to look at this a little bit more, it's called Fountain Pen Design, Function, Development, Construction, and Fabrication of, and this particular one is the feeds function. And they have actually a few pages. They talk about capillary action and surface tension, and it was a really interesting read on, and I'll put a link in the description. Really interesting information on the feed. Bubbles and bottles, surface tension, capillaries, application to the feed, and so forth. So it takes you right here. You're getting a description. There's your air inlet, and it's cool because that one wide channel on the bottom of your feed, it actually makes an air kind of an air membrane right there. Anyway, if you want to get into the scientific aspects of this, it gets in there. It talks about how the material that you use to write on the paper, depending on how fibrous it is, as you pull it, the fibers pull ink and it draws ink down. You have gravity that draws ink down, but then you have those fibers of your paper that pulls ink out, and all of that is engineered into these nibs. And so that's what got me onto this, the amazing feeds. Isn't that cool? I think that's cool personally, and I hope that you think that is cool. What we use, our pens, are amazing technological engineering masterpieces. So if anybody says, oh, what's the big deal about fountain pens? There you go. You can explain the feed and all that, how all of that works, and really seems smart and interesting to these people. Otherwise, they, either that or they will look at you and say, you are weird. Usually that's the reaction I get, but so what? My apologies too for those two gentlemen that I quoted. I'm hoping I interpreted what they said properly, but even if I didn't interpret interpret them properly. What they said took me down a very interesting rabbit trail, and that's the great thing I really appreciate about comments, because they get me thinking, they get me researching, and I think that they get others, as they read your comments, they will get them looking and researching more as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and you have a good day.